Today we're going to be talking about demystifying the editing process. Now, I've already done a little bit about this and talked a little bit about this in other videos, but I wanted to really get into depth about red flags that you can look for when looking for an editor/agent, and things to know when it comes to picking your own editor and things that can help you with working with an editor and everything like that. And we're going to talk briefly about types of publishing. All right. Oh, and as a reminder, this video is being posted an hour before we have Writers Club meetings from 8 to 9 on the 26th. That should be today based on when I'm posting it. I'm recording it early, but I will be posting it on the 26th. So please know that we will be there from 8 to 9 p.m. and we would love to have you come. All right, so when looking for First, we're going to talk about publishing because I'm realizing that it's probably good to talk about it in the other order. With publishers, traditional publishing, you never have to pay anyone. If someone asks for payment to publish your book, it's what's called a vanity press, and that's basically the types of paperback terrible books you see at gas stations because they didn't really do a good job editing it or marketing it or anything else. It's just that they published it basically slightly better than, actually I would say it's worse than self-publishing. I was going to say slightly better than self-publishing just because you don't have to do the marketing yourself, but in my opinion it's actually far worse because ultimately you don't get as good a product. So vanity presses, no, please don't. If you're going to get published, I would say either go traditional or self-published. Don't ever do vanity. With traditionally publishing, you don't ever have to pay them a dime. They pay you. You submit your novel to an agent, and then that agent submits it to publishing companies, and then the publishing companies either take it or leave it. If they take it, they'll pay you, and if they don't, they won't. And that's pretty much how it goes. You never have to pay them a dime. And same thing with the agent. You never have to pay your agent. The reason why is because they should be looking for a good contract for you that gives them a percentage. So they're looking for the contract, you give them a percentage. If you're paying them up front, then they have no incentive to get you a better contract and no incentive to actually get you published. You're paying them for essentially nothing. This is a big red flag with agents, speaking of red flags. So if you're going traditional, make sure that you try to focus on publishing houses that you think are going to be most likely to take your style. That's the biggest problem. And also you got to look at the market. Sometimes you're out of the market. In my opinion, there's never such thing, but publishing companies do consider marketing trends in what they publish and don't publish. And unfortunately, that is going to influence whether or not they take on your book. That being said, the next best thing is self-publishing. Now with self-publishing, you do have to pay your editor, and this is when you're going to be picking your editor. Typically you don't pick your editor unless you're self-publishing. With self-publishing though, you get to pick your editor, you get to work with your editor, and they get to be as fantastic or not fantastic as you decide, really. And that being said, I'm going to go kind of deep dive into that process with self-publishing. Also, if you're finding that you're getting a boatload of rejection letters, I would say if you're seeing that a lot of the rejection letters are giving you all the same feedback, the same constructive criticism, then maybe it's time to look at an editor and mention to the editor, hey, they've been mentioning this, how do I fix it? Or if you get a revise and resubmit and you don't know how to fix those revisions, this is also a good time to look for an editor if you're doing traditional. So there are other times, but generally self-published is the one you're mainly going to go for. All right, so red flags when looking for an editor, and these also apply to agents. If they ask for payment up front with no signed contract, and that means that they aren't going to do it. With editors, if they ask for payment up front and don't sign a contract, that means that they are absolutely a scam. However, if an agent asks for money up front, they are automatically a scam. There should be no contract, there should be no money up front. Agents should take you on and then get a contract from a publisher that includes their payment in it. So those are two different things. Either way, if they ask for a payment up front, it's generally a bad idea. Now, if you sign a contract and then they say payment up front, then you can go to your lawyer and say, I signed a contract, they need to give me the editing services or pay me back the money. Those are absolutely things that can happen to you, and that's good to keep in mind. All right, the next thing is when they love bomb your work but refuse to say anything negative about it. No constructive criticism. They're basically just like, your book is perfect, your book is amazing, your book is wonderful. You want your editor to be positive. Absolutely. I am always a positive editor in my own environment. I love to say what I love. I love to say quirky quotes. I love to mention what characters I love. I love to mention what bits of the plot were intriguing to me. But the problem is when they never mention any constructive criticism. I always make sure that I put just as much criticism as I do compliments. Sometimes, depending on if the book is really rough, it might slightly outweigh or slightly underweigh. If it's super polished, then it might be more compliments than critique. If it's super unpolished, then maybe it'll be more critique than compliments. But I try to keep it even. Because I believe that you need the constructive criticism, first of all. Second of all, if you're love bombing someone, that means you're more likely to be enticing them into paying them so you can scam them. That's generally a thing you want to look out for. Another thing is if they don't offer any sample of their work, paid or otherwise. Some people do paid samples, and other people do free samples of their editing work. Now, that being said, generally, with the paid samples, they'll offer you some sort of discount once you actually do their editing services. And so as a result of that, it's more like you're paying me, but you're paying me for my time, so I can prove to you what I'm worth, kind of a thing. Meanwhile, I would say generally the free ones are really great. I've run into some people that do not free ones, but it's debatable. I don't personally like that as a policy, but that's okay. Other people love it. Everyone's uniquely different. So with the sample, it's different story. They can do paid or otherwise. However, if they don't offer any sort of sample, that's a little scary. I would been told many times to check out Writer Beware. Authors and myself have found it incredibly helpful for avoiding scammer agents and editors. All right, things to know when picking your editor. Ask your editor how they define the following: developmental editing, content editing, line editing, and proofreading. You're going to want to know that because, first of all, if they're a scammer, they won't know how to define it, or they'll copy paste it off of Google, and so you'll be able to catch them real quick. But also, with that being said, developmental editing, content editing, line editing, and proofreading are all very differently defined by everyone in the community. No one actually has a straight, strict definition except Google itself, and even Google, that's an opinion. It is not perfectly defined amongst the editing community. Don't know why, but it's the case. I've been to several writers' conferences with dozens of editors, and they all agree that they define it differently, just ever so slightly. So that is going to help you know what kinds of things you're going to look for and get in your editing receival, what you'll receive with editing. There we go. That's a better way to phrase it. I'm not as good with speaking as I am with actual writing. All right, you also need to know the estimates. The low end rates tend to be around 1.5 cents per word, but can be as much as 5 cents per word. Now this seems low, but obviously once you type that into a calculator, it starts cranking up real fast. Some people do an hourly rate. However, most people do per word rates. That is far more common. With hourly rates, just do the calculation of what the hourly rate would be for the per word rate. If they worked theoretically an X amount of hours kind of thing, and generally that will help give you a good idea of what is more fair. Generally though, like I said, per word is so much more popular, you almost never run into hourly rates. Your editor should encourage you as well as you edit your work. In my opinion, there are so many editors out there that just edit, and they don't give you a single compliment. And that sucks. As someone who is also a writer as well as an editor, it really sucks when I've had editors that have done things like that for my short stories. I much preferred my editors that were encouraging and mentioned what they liked as well as what was problematic with my work. So that's something I would personally say definitely look for, because otherwise you're going to look to get your soul crushed a little bit. With editing, they're supposed to help mention things that you might be biased for or against in your writing. For example, I just worked with a client recently who was dealing with some imposter syndrome, feeling like they hadn't quite written this particular historical thing right. And when I read it, I actually felt like it was very historically accurate. I fact-checked everything that they did, and it seemed very smooth, very crisp, very clean. It was very well done. It wasn't too flowery, since they were also worried about that. It was honestly perfectly done. I thought it was excellent. But it was something that they were worried about, and they were biased against because they were worried, so concerned about it. And in the opposite direction, you could love a character that is your absolute perfect favorite character in all of existence, and maybe that character is not ultimately benefiting your story. That can happen sometimes. I know with Brandon Sanderson, he actually said he had a character that he wrote into one of his stories that he absolutely loved, but he had to delete them because his editor was like, you're writing a dark fantasy and you've put in this comedic, wholesome fluff ball that just totally detracts from the whole vibe of your story. Not those exact words, but it was on his podcast, so I'm paraphrasing. And so he had to delete that whole character. But his bias would have said no, automatically. That's where an editor helps you. Alright. I would also say make sure that their style of critique works well with you. That's why a sample is so important, because they might have a style of critique that just doesn't quite mesh with your writing style. I actually had someone with me who worked with me recently who had gone to 4 different editors before she chose me. And the reason why is because she felt like all of their editing styles just did not mesh well with what she was trying to do, whereas mine meshed perfectly and we totally clicked and really got each other. So if you're self-publishing in particular, make sure you find an editor that you really click with. Unfortunately, with traditional, you just get whatever editor they assign to you, and if you get famous enough, hopefully you can tell them, hey, maybe give me a new one if you really don't like them, but otherwise, generally, self-publishing is the best way to pick your editor. Next thing that I want to mention really briefly is that Grammarly is not perfect, and it is made for academic writing. As a result, it is prone to make a lot of mistakes. There have been a lot of times where I will be writing my short stories, and I'll use Grammarly on my short stories, and I would say about 50% of the time Grammarly is actually wrong. It will suggest commas or apostrophes in the wrong places. It will correct words to things that are not correct. It will correct its to the wrong type of its. And all sorts of things like that. It is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, so don't think that just because you ran over it with Grammarly that it's going to be the same as getting a line editor. Line editing is entirely different. Speaking of which, let's define some things. So proofreading. The goal of proofreading is to make sure that you get any glaring grammar mistakes and that typos are resolved. It ensures that obvious problems are addressed with the author and possibly revised. So like, hey, his name is Stephen in this chapter, and Steve, and you spell Stephen entirely differently in the next chapter, like one's with a V and the other one's with a PH, kind of a thing. Those are obvious problems. The other thing with proofreading is avoiding potential embarrassment if you have something missing. For example, sometimes things get deleted in the process of moving it from one platform to the other. You're missing whole paragraphs or whole chapters even. Those are basic proofreading goals. With editing, make sure all of those are taken into account, but also that your novel has its best chance of getting accepted or succeeding as a published work, whether you're doing self-published or traditional. So that involves fixing major story problems most proofreaders would miss due to inexperience, helping improve your writing overall to be the best it can possibly be content-wise. So this is things like phrasing being funny. This is things like, hey, you're missing some key details here, or you're telling when you should be showing, things like that. It also helps to remedy any glaring grammar mistakes and typos and ensure that obvious issues are revised with the author. Content editing will generally cover character consistency, making sure that characters are true to their emotional vows and bounds. Make sure that your world building is all solid and tight. Adding or deleting scenes or even whole characters like we talked about earlier. Overall, making your writing the best that it can possibly be with the actual content. However, line editing is when you go over grammar typos, 2 different things, spelling errors, sentence structure, and clarity. So this is when we read the actual sentence and go, I don't even know what you're saying here. Who are we talking to? And things like that. Or even just rephrasing it to be like, hey, this is in weird, funny word order. This would sound more fluid and better, and things like that. Um, Overall, I would say when looking for an editor, make sure you don't get a scammer, obviously, and make sure that they are willing to work with you and that they are encouraging you and helping you in all the ways that they possibly can. If you have any other questions about the editing process or finding an editor, please comment down below. And I hope to see you at Writers Club from 8 to 9 p.m. at the library.